in 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike. This episode is brought to you by Loa Boots. Start your day off on the right foot with footwear that was designed for those who stand relentlessly in the face of adversity. I wear Loa every single day, for miles on canine searches and for hours on tactical operations in inclement weather. No matter what, Loa keeps me moving. Whether you run, hike, hunt, or fight, on the streets or out in the woods, Loa has the gear you need to help you conquer whatever challenges you face. Go check out their new line of trail running shoes at Loa Boots, L-O-W-A Boots.com, and get outside for some fresh air and daylight. Loa, for those who know where they're going and won't stop until they get there.
And this is Jim. This episode is also brought to you by ManusX. We've talked a lot about the tactical fantasy on this podcast, and one of the quickest ways to break your tactical fantasies and actually improve your performance is by getting real feedback. One of the ways you can do that is with ManusX. You're not going to get better at shooting on your own. You need practice, data, and coaching. And you need to make the most of your ammo with good live and dry fire training. Manus is a family of training devices that tracks you while you train. It times and tracks everything you do in a drill and coaches you as you go. It is indispensable to taking your shooting to the next level. Go find them on manusx.com. Hey, Mike. A couple weeks ago, I was getting ready to go overseas, and I meet up with my intel cats, my security cats, that kind of thing. We have a sit down about what we're going to see when we go overseas. And one thing that always comes up is if you're a 4 and she's a 7 or a 9, she's probably not really into you, right? And that is a tale as old as spying. It's called the honeypot approach, right? That if you're getting a lot of attention and you don't have the vibe that would normally get you attention, that person probably has that person probably has an agenda, right? And it kind of reminds me of the phrase that the reason mouse traps work is because the mouse doesn't understand why the cheese is free. So it kind of got me wrestling over the last couple of weeks with this cluster of ideas about and trying to explain these ideas that should be something really simple, like how people interact. In some ways, that's super simple. In some ways, it's super complex. And I wanted to give some simple strategies to give our listeners some advantages in situations where they're trying to influence someone toward an outcome, and the other party is trying to influence them right back. And it turns out, when you think about human interaction, that's actually a really common dynamic where maybe most interactions between humans involve each one trying to influence the other in some way. Think about that. Like dating, you're trying to influence each other. Working, even among peers, side-to-side leadership, peer level, horizontal leadership, you're trying to influence your boss. Your boss is trying to influence you right back. On a traffic stop, the officer is trying to influence the person they just pulled over, and the person who got pulled over is trying to influence that officer. And you could say in all of those, they're trying to lead each other. And in some cases, you could even say manipulate each other or even coerce each other. And leadership books and training usually aren't written like that. They tend to be written in this top-down format where you are the leader, you're the designated chief or the designated boss or the manager or commander or whatever. And the other party is the follower.
And this is one of those concepts that people want that simple, easy thing, right? They really want the cheat code. And if I'm writing a book about leadership and I want to sell that book, that's obviously what I'm going to try to market, is that I've cracked the code and it's in these pages right here. All you got to do is pay for the book. And all of that assumes that the person who is going to read that book isn't trying to be the world's best follower. It's going to be tailored to the people in these leadership or management roles, or at least they're aspiring to that, right? if you think about the sorts of books that would be for the followers, right? It's you're not going to sell it that way, right? It's going to be marketed in a way that's like a how-to book, how to do certain tasks, or tell stories about certain careers, or it's going to teach concepts outside of quote-unquote leadership. Maybe it's about sales just in general, or marketing, or policing, but it's not necessarily going to be about leading and influencing.
Yeah, how to be a good subordinate, right? That typically doesn't...
Yeah. How to shut up and
good.
color.
Yeah.
It's not going to sell well, right? It's going to be marketed another way. And the thing that's interesting in those jobs, right? Sales, policing, marketing. The funny thing about that is all of those examples involve exactly that, the leading and the influencing part. And the thing is in real life, where rubber meets the road on all this is that nuance that Jim was kind of describing, right? Sometimes the subordinates are influencing their bosses. Sometimes you trust and delegate tasks out to other people, and someone else has to kind of keep the ship afloat. And depending on the day or the task, you can flip-flop, right? There are certain calls and certain situations that, hey, I know like I'm probably not the guy for that. Like that might be a Jim thing, or this certain thing might be more of a Mike thing. And we can kind of go back and forth depending on the situation that we're in. There are certain calls where I might jump in and inject myself and try to take some positive control over something. And there are ones where I'm just going to sit back and be available in case shit goes sideways. It just depends. So where this really comes into play when you're dealing with this kind of, am I trying to manipulate or coerce or influence, and what does that look like? What you have to recognize is that sometimes I'm going to slow things down and I'm going to soften my language, right? And sometimes I'm going to be like real clear and real forceful, like maybe literally forceful in the way I handle stuff. And that's the key in all of this. Leadership problems and just the general context of human interactions is where this all plays in. And like all human interactions, they are dynamic and they feed off of each other and they evolve.
Yeah. So can you think of any cases where you're the leader, like the designated leader in a situation, and the person you're trying to lead doesn't recognize that, or they recognize it and they don't care, and they see themselves as the leader? You probably think of a lot of instances. I deal with that every time I interact with my kids.
Great example,
in charge?
Honestly.
Yeah. And some of those cases can be pretty tense and hostile and even violent. So these squishy leadership skills have tactical application. In fact, maybe really big tactical application. Remember, if you're a cop on a traffic stop, you're trying to lead the person you pulled over to a safe and reasonable outcome. And that might be leading them into handcuffs in the back of your car. You're leading them through that, right? But understand, they may also be trying to lead you, and maybe in a direction you don't want to go. We recently did an episode about the murder of Deputy Dinkheller. And in Georgia, it was a tragic scene, but very specifically, the perpetrator, the murderer in that case, was trying to lead Deputy Dinkheller into a shooting. And you could see it from the beginning. He was crazy, but he had an agenda. Mike, have you ever seen a case where someone you were dealing with in a law enforcement capacity was trying to manipulate you or coerce you or lead you someplace you don't want to go?
Yeah, I mean, the sort of thing happens all the time. I mean, your examples are all good. I mean, earlier you mentioned that like a dating scenario, right? You're trying to
Are you dating the people you're dealing with in a law enforcement capacity?
No. I'm just saying all the life scenarios, right? A sales interaction, like if you're buying a car or buying a house. I mean, you see this stuff all over the place. Even like venting to a friend. Sometimes you just want to vent to a friend and like they want to solve all of your problems. And you're like, I don't need you to solve my problems. I just need you to hear me out for a second. I'm trying to process through this, right? Like, so people get led when they don't want to be all the time. And absolutely, you see it in law enforcement and policing interactions, especially because that role in particular is often inherently adversarial. Like you mentioned, talking the guy into handcuffs. Like obviously no one's like, you know what, I was really hoping that actually I might find myself in jail tonight. That actually sounds perfect. Like that's not a real common thing. So these interactions are something that, again, like how you approach that is going to vary depending on the scenario. But in almost every police interaction, maybe they want to talk or run or fight their way out of trouble, but often it's just they want to minimize or deflect or manipulate or blame or reason or rationalize whatever their version of the story is. And you could see that happen not only with suspects or violators like criminal offenders or whatever that you might be interviewing, but witnesses will often take sides and on what they think they saw or what they think should happen. Victims, oftentimes, like if they want accountability, they might point someone out that's not the right guy because, it's an emotional thing for them and they want to see someone held accountable, but we still have to kind of prove it, right? And that's so it really takes quite a bit of detachment. And where you can see this most prominently is any of those scenarios you can imagine that might involve like crisis negotiators, right? A barricaded person or a hostage situation where both the suspect and the police want very different things. And on each side's perspective, there are often non-negotiables, right, that we have to work around. Like the guy wants a helicopter and $1 million and to take the hostages with him to Haiti or something. Well, we're obviously not going to let that happen. Like that's just, it's a no, it's just a no, right? So, and we know how it's going to end, but this is one of those things where you do this dance. And I really think it's important to notice that it is a dance. There's a lot of back and forth that happen in those kinds of things. And both people get a vote in that dynamic.
Yeah, what we're describing is a huge swath of human interaction, right? The entire spectrum from Mike on a traffic stop to a civilian in a Walmart parking lot late at night. Someone approaches you. That person wants something. You want something out of that interaction. Maybe a really tense, a guy's trying to suicide by cop and he's trying to lead that cop to that outcome. Or even just the interactions between you and a coworker. Just a conversation back and forth where, they're trying to get you to cover their shift. And they're trying to lead you to that, and maybe you don't want to cover their shift, or maybe you do, right? But you have to do a little dance. That little dance is kind of what we're talking about here. So it wouldn't be our podcast if we didn't talk about OODA loops, right? I ate them for breakfast this morning. My OODA loops and my milk, and my coffee. So you have a decision cycle, observe, orient, decide, act cycle. The other guy also has one. You are trying to give his cycle inputs to narrow his choices down to only the ones you want him to pick. You're trying to choice shape a little bit. And he might well be doing the same to you. So a surprising amount of tactical stuff is really, truly leadership stuff. You're trying to influence and manipulate their OODA cycle, and they're trying to do the same back to you. Now, we've talked about leadership on previous episodes, but what I want to hit today is specifically having that type of social intelligence to help you recognize a situation like this, navigate your way through it, specifically when the other guy is trying to manipulate, dominate, control, or influence you.
Yeah, so if we acknowledge what Jim is describing, like a hostile sort of event like this, right?
Or the whole spectrum, right? All the way to super hostile and all the way to friendly. Hey, bro, can you just, can you cover my shift next Tuesday? Or can you cover Christmas? Right?
Yeah, I mean, so where I'm going with this is like it's inherently adversarial, right? We're talking about conflict. And that might seem obvious, right? Because there are differing objectives and goals, and that's fine. But the thing is, sometimes it's not like outwardly hostile. And you're not really sure, like, why are you asking, like, someone's asking you a question, like, why are you asking me this? Like, are you trying to, like, set me up to get me in trouble for something? Like, what? This is kind of weird, right? Like, there's a lot of gray. And they might be trying to trick or deceive you, or they might be, like, trying to work something in that you're not expecting. And one of my favorite quotes from the guy who wrote The Gift of Fear, and I actually read it in one of his other books, Gavin DeBecker. He wrote another book called Protecting the Gift. He explains that charm is a verb, not a trait. In other words, it's not an adjective. If a person is charming, that is a thing that they are doing, not a trait that they possess, right? So if they are charming you, that is an action word. And I really like that way of thinking about it because, like, why are you being so nice to me right now? Like, what's going on in there? it's important to recognize that. And it's not to be like paranoid and think that everyone is out to get you. It's just to recognize that even if it's something like Jim said, covering my shift or something like that, you're dealing with two different people who have two different perspectives and sets of goals and whatever, right? And at the very least, there are situations, these are situations where we might like not totally agree on the trade-offs, right, for each other. If we're trying to help each other out, like it might not be quote unquote fair, because life isn't fair that way. And sometimes we're helping each other, but at the very least, we just have different goals, different objectives. And maybe they're just completely separate, right? They're just, Jim wants to go to the holiday Christmas party and he needs a shift covered. And I want a Saturday night off to myself. Those are two completely separate things, right? They're not necessarily in direct conflict with each other, but sometimes they are. Sometimes it's the bad guy wants to be let go free, and that's not an option. He's going to jail tonight. It's just how he's going to go to jail that is really up for discussion, right? So if we consider all of that, what we have to recognize to be effective in this from a leadership kind of perspective is there's a lot of ego at play. You're dealing with human interactions, and we all want to protect ourselves. Like we have a defense mechanism inherent in us that wants to protect our pride. It wants to protect us from embarrassment, from looking funny in front of our friends, right? Like there's all these things that are at play. Like think about like you watch a reality TV show, how much drama there is, or how some people might describe their workplace as like it's like high school drama up in there, all the gossip and all this stuff. Like the world is full of conflict, big and small, right? Humans are just that way. And so where we're going with this episode is to consider those gray area conflicts where there is some potential for hostility that's maybe threatening or harmful. They're probably not your friend, right? But they're not necessarily a bad guy because you just don't know. And so I think from a tactical standpoint, a little bit of wit and some social intelligence can be really valuable for your toolkit. So in getting ready for this, because there's a lot of like leadership overlay, I was doing some reading and trying to figure out like where do we go with this? And a lot of times what I see in law enforcement interactions is like, especially the younger, less experienced cops who've been taught like to control the scene and have command officer presence and all these things, like when they interact with like the career criminal who's been in and out of prison and he's been around the block a couple of times, they kind of want to really exert themselves. And often it's easier for the more experienced officers, the veteran cops, to have like build rapport with them, right? And you see this a lot. And really what it boils down to is knowing when to lean into something and when to kind of back off, right? So I saw a couple quotes, and one of them was, one was actually a Mike Pence quote. It was similar to the first one. The other one I'm going to read you, it's the opposite of leadership is consensus. And I like that because if we're talking about these conflicts where people are trying to influence each other, that's the issue, right? Is we don't agree on something. But another version,
if we're all already on the same page, there's nothing to influence, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. And that becomes real quickly, it becomes groupthink.
Yeah,
which is a whole other concept for another day. But the other one that I read that was similar to that was the opposite of leadership is spectatorship. And the opposite of spectatorship is engagement.
That's a lot of opposites.
Yeah.
That's like a triangle of opposites.
It is kind of a triangle.
Yeah.
But I think there's interesting words in there. Spectatorship. If you're just watching what's happening, you're not influencing the events, not helpful. And the opposite of that has to do with engagement, right? Where there's some back and forth. There's an exchange of ideas. There's an exchange of, people are sharing what the issues are. And I think that when I consider a hostage barricade type of situation where negotiators are trying to talk someone into doing something they don't want to do, the whole goal in a lot of that is to find there are threads of common ground that you might be able to find, threads of common understanding where each person, like at face value, they might be like, I don't want to go to jail. And at some point you can start to maybe wither that down to like, okay, you don't want to go to jail, or you don't want to be dragged out of the house like this because of your dignity and your pride And maybe there's a way that we can do this that sort of softens the blow in front of your family and whatever else, right? Like, and lets you retain some of that. Like, you can find these common little threads and a little string that you can pull on, and that goes a long way. So that's the engagement. That's where you can start to, and we'll talk later about like active listening and stuff like that. But when it comes to engagement, you need that for leadership, right? And I think victimhood plays a role in this too. Like, when people feel victimized or they feel like they are a victim of something, like, it's important to recognize and consider that. And kind of more generally, like if we're talking about a bad guy is trying to corner me into this situation, the concept of initiative in conflict. In other words, this person gets to exert their will against you and you have no say. Right? Like, hey, I'm here to rob you of your, give me your wallet and keys and your phone. And like,
you're reacting to it.
And you're backed into a corner and you have no choice. The other guy gets to make all the moves and call all the shots, versus the opportunity for you to give input to the situation and make him react to you. So that's engagement, right? That's different than just standing by and being a spectator or a victim, or conceding to the fact that he wants your wallet and keys and phone and, oh, okay, well, here you go. No disagreement, I guess. Like, you're the guy with the knife, I'll give it to you, right? So
he has effectively led you, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And you apparently didn't disagree. And that's,
you're now a spectator.
Yeah. Yeah. And you feed off of each other, right? That's the thing about those human interactions. So this is kind of random, but something that comes to mind in thinking about this. When I did couples counseling, the doc had me start going to a different therapist. Like, I would, traditionally saw that doctor for therapy. And then my ex-wife and I went in for couples counseling. And one of the things was, like, I had to go see a different doc for my own individual work because I was no longer her client. The marriage was. And I thought that was interesting because if you think about, she's there to serve the marriage and what's best for the marriage, the dynamic between the two people, not either one of us. So think about that in terms of your interactions, right? You're there for the interaction, whatever the objective or the mission or goal of that interaction is, not because you need to win or not because you need to exert your will, right? You have a goal, but so does the other person. So I just think that the thought of detachment goes a long way there. So there's a bunch of stuff you can read about this. There was an article that talked about the difference between power leadership and servant leadership. And the idea being that servant leaders tend to be more like team players, mentors. They're outwardly focused. They have foresight that comes from listening. In other words, it's a cooperative effort. Hey, we're going to work through this and come up with a solution together, versus just exerting their power. And the thing is in situations like this, we need that dynamic type of leadership. We need the capacity to be whatever they need us to be, whatever the goal and the mission and the situation requires us to be effective, and not lose sight of the metric for winning, right? The metric for winning is whatever that goal or objective is, not to just outsmart the other guy because I said so. And I think that's really, really important. Clear goal setting goes a long way. That might mean get out of the situation safely with like a secondary asterisk goal of like, ideally with my wallet and my keys. That would be neat, right? But maybe just safely is the number one objective, and you need to go with that. If that means conceding in that situation, so be it. You walk away with your, maybe not your wallet and your keys, but your health, if nothing else, right? But it is not necessarily just because I want to show someone what happens when they fuck around so they can find out. Like, we run into a lot of trouble in that sense. So another article that I came across that I thought fed into this idea a little bit as it relates to leadership stuff is they talk about ways that leadership is the opposite of what people think. And this is a different article. We'll link to it, right? But the paradoxes.
Lots of opposites.
Yeah. And that's
interesting.
If you read Jocko's book, he talks about the dichotomy of leadership.
Huh.
And that's it is. There are trade-offs and balances to be struck. balances?
Stricken?
Stricken?
Struck.
Anyway, but yeah, so the opposites, but that's the thing is there are a lot of opposites, and it's like those slider scales that we're always talking about. And the situation might require different things, right? The paradoxes of leadership. One is letting go. Is this essential? Do I have to keep control of this, or can I let it go? Micromanagers do this a lot, where they really want to dictate the outcomes, and so they don't want to let control of certain things. But what they often fail to recognize is that they cannot control all of the things, and there are certain things they will have to let go of, right? So that's one of those balances you have to find in leadership. A second one was succeeding only when others succeed, right? So what is the objective? It's not about me. It's not about the recognition or the award that I'm going to get if I resolve this situation a certain way, or how cool I look in front of my friends, or that I never lose, or I win every fight. It's not about me. It's about whatever the mission is. And I think that's important. Succeeding only when others succeed. And that includes, in the context of law enforcement, right? Peaceful outcomes for the bad guys in a lot of cases. And the third one was not providing answers, but instead asking better questions, or asking the right questions. And I think that one feeds well into what I was saying earlier about like clear goal setting. What is the metric for success here, right? The last one that I want to cover that spoke to me about this a little bit was a quote from a guy named Seth Berkley. I had no idea who that was. It turns out he's like a doctor who does like he works on getting access to immunizations in developing countries and stuff. And there was some stuff that he did related to COVID and getting the COVID vaccine out to other, places in the world that needed it. But there's a quote I found about him in a leadership article. It says, "Leadership is about vision and responsibility, not power." And just in reading the context about it and reading his wiki, one of the things that got me thinking about was the COVID vaccine, and how that was essentially forced onto a lot of people, and how hard people fought that and still fight that in some cases, right? And again, I think this is a really important realization to think about for leadership, especially when it gets to that like tactical, strategic, what are we trying to pull off here? The goal is to get people vaccinated and to deal with the bug, right? It's not about winning. It's not about exerting your power. It's about that mission accomplishment. So anyway, I don't have any big takeaways as far as the COVID vaccine, but just think about how people were trying to lead people a way they didn't want to go. It fits, right? So getting the guy peacefully into handcuffs, it doesn't have to be about because I said so or else, right? It's not about that. It's not a pissing match or battle of the egos. You have to be able to distinguish that in your mind and detach a little bit from the problem.
Man, ultimately what we're talking about here is emotional intelligence.
Ew.
That sounds really squishy and gross. But that really is the essence of a lot of crisis negotiation, a lot of de-escalation, and even a lot of the James Bond spy stuff. You have to be able to read a room to do tactical jobs well. But you can't just tell a trainee, like, read the room. That doesn't work. Or read body language. Like, well, okay, great. He's got his arms crossed. Okay, great. Right? His hands are in his pockets. Am I supposed to shoot him because I can't see his hands, or am I supposed to lead him? I don't know. Right? That doesn't get us there. We have to dig a little bit deeper. And part of that is maybe being that dynamic leader and recognizing, okay, this is this guy's agenda. Maybe I'm going to shift gears. He's all amped up. He doesn't want to go. Okay, cool. Maybe remind him, like, look, I'm not your enemy here. I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to help you not die in this situation, or not get beat up, or not get another charge, or whatever. And here's how we're going to get through this together. I'm on your side. Right?
Well, yeah, and like crisis negotiations, like at the end of the day, in a law enforcement context, generally speaking, we know how this is going to end. There's a couple different routes we could take to get there, but like
more or less pepper ball
or something, right?
Yeah.
But like we always say, the enemy gets a vote, and you're trying to be able to mitigate some of those variables that aren't in our control, because there are options, right? And there's a lot of different things that can play into it. So you're trying to create this path where they walk towards it thinking coming out and giving up was on their terms and it was their idea. And so the crisis negotiation kind of process, they use a lot of active listening skills. They try to show empathy to the person, build rapport, And then with that rapport, they can start to influence their way of thinking, and maybe that leads to some behavior change. But if you jump straight to problem solving with them, the person's not going to feel heard or understood or validated. And that's important because, again, there are common threads in a lot of those interactions. Even though there is the polar opposite objective at the end of the day, there is probably still some common ground that we can find to make this sting a little bit less, maybe, right? And yeah, I know that sounds kind of lame and boring. I would much prefer oftentimes to just drive the front of the truck into their living room and be like, hey man, we opened the door, like time to come out. But if there's anything that I've learned working in this criminal justice field, odds are good that we're probably going to see that person again. And maybe hearing them out and just taking the high road and showing them that they and we are all human and we're not here to just give people a hard time, like maybe we'll be a little bit better off in the long run. Maybe not, but it does help build credibility for our case, right? It lets us win the moral high ground, if nothing else.
I like that. In my research, I came across a guy named David Goleman. He wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence, and we'll link to it in the show notes. He identified 5 key attributes in this realm: self-awareness, self-regulation, internal motivation, empathy, and social skill. And we found an article on acipio.com explaining that, and I'll reference them. I'll give you some editorial as we go, but I'm largely quoting them. So, number 1, self-awareness. Individuals with high levels of emotional intelligence are comfortable with their own thoughts and emotions and understand how they impact others. Understanding and accepting the way you feel is often the first step to overcoming it. So that means you, the operator, the cop, the whatever you are, the person in this interaction, you need to know your own thoughts and feelings. You need to recognize when you are feeling a certain way or thinking a certain way or coming across to others a certain way. Your perception of yourself needs to be conscious and accurate. You literally got to look in the mirror and be like, how am I coming across right now? And that is the first step in reading a room, is knowing what your role in that room is. Okay. Next is self-regulation. Their quote, "It's also important to be able to control and manage your impulses and emotions. Acting rashly or without caution can lead to mistakes being made and can often damage relationships with clients or colleagues." Okay, so what does that mean to you, the operator? That means you need to control your thoughts, your feelings, your reactions. You can react to inputs, but you need to filter those reactions and not just impulse your way through it. Right? You control your level of being amped up in this interaction. You control whether you feel like she's really into you.
Well, and there's also, like, self-awareness is great, but it only really matters if you can do something about it in the moment, right? It's one thing to reflect after the fact and be like, yeah, I was kind of a dick on that one. But you were already a dick, and so it doesn't really help, right? So there's a self-regulation part where maybe you recognize your ability to, like, change course if you're starting to be a certain way, or take a step back and let someone else step in, right? Hey, maybe this is a gym problem. And so, like, self-regulation can look a lot of different ways, but that's where, like, the self-awareness only goes so far. You've got to be able to follow that up with meaningful actions, right?
Yeah. So you read yourself, and let's take the stripper example, right? You're starting to feel like the stripper is really into you. Is she really into you? Probably not, but maybe, right? Yeah. What's her agenda here, right? Okay. So knowing that I feel that way, what should I do? Regulate myself. Right? Like, nope, not going that way.
I will only spend this many dollars.
Yeah. Okay. Next is internal motivation,
which feeds into that exact scenario, actually.
Yeah. I am very internally motivated. Yeah. So being driven by only money or material rewards is not a beneficial characteristic, according to Goleman. A passion for what you do is far better for your emotional intelligence. This leads to sustained motivation, clear decision-making, and better understanding of the organization's aims. Okay. I think this is a big one. If you know what motivates you and you aren't reliant on others, externals, for motivation, it's a lot harder for others to influence you without your consent. So, as soon as someone figures out what your motivation is and they realize they have a lever on it, they can push that lever, right? So if I realize money is what motivates you, that's the thing I'm going to push. If I realize pride or ego are what motivate you, that's the lever I'm going to push. Or vanity, right? I deal with pilots all day, every day. If I know what motivates them, interacting with tech. Okay, great. Here's some tech. Here, look at this. Well, I get you to do what I want you to do. Okay.
Yeah, this is like it's part of what I was saying about the detachment thing, because like a lot of guys that get really into the idea, like they want to win, they want to control, they want things to go their way. And if you can detach a little bit and be like, look, what is my motivation here? And it really boils down often to like values. And with criminal offenders especially, right? Like this is something all cops, if you haven't heard any of our episodes, we talked about Maslow's hierarchy and stuff. And like, if you think about like gang culture and just generally the culture of like low income, poverty, low income and high crime areas, right? You have to understand that like the way they survived on their terms in those neighborhoods is different probably than the way many police officers were raised. So if you understand how they survived and came up on their terms, right? Like one of the things in those areas for a lot of the people that grew up that way that maybe you won't be able to fully appreciate, like respect goes a long way. And how they earn respect and how they show respect to each other. And that's one of those deals that like cops just assume it's a given, right? Because they're wearing a uniform, they got a badge, and they have authority that they're going to be respected. That's not how it worked for a lot of these people growing up. And so like looking into their values, a lot of times their internal motivation might be less about, do I want to go to jail? And a lot more about like, again, that ego, dignity, respect stuff.
So this is also one of the easy clues that someone is trying to manipulate you is they are trying to find your levers, right? So someone who grows up where respect is the most important thing, you'll see they will either respect you up or respect you down to try to influence you, right? Oh, you're just a little girl. You're not cool. Like take that badge off and then you're nothing, right? Mm-hmm. They're playing with your sense of self and respect to try to influence you, right? Try to get a reaction out of you. Or they try to impress you with money, bribery, that kind of thing. Or any other thing, right? When you see someone working their way through the levers, that's your big tip that, okay, this person is trying to find a lever on me, right? That goes back to your self-awareness. Next up is empathy. Not only must you understand your own emotions, but understanding and reacting to the emotions of others is super duper important. Identifying a certain mood or emotion from a colleague or a client and reacting to it can go a long way in developing a relationship. Stop and pay attention to the other person. What is it that they are saying? What is their agenda? What are their feelings? What are they expressing? What are they not expressing, right? So it's great that you know yourself, but you also have to be able to see the world through the other party's point of view. Understand their motivation, understand their agenda. What are they trying to get out of this conversation? Next up is social skill. That sounds super vague, but roll with it. Social skills are more important than just being friendly. Goleman describes this as friendliness with a purpose, right? You can be friendly, but you don't have to be friends with everybody, meaning everybody is treated politely and with respect, yet healthy relationships are then also used for personal and organizational benefit. Now, there are specific social skills you need to bring to bear in an interaction. A lot of that is cultural and not just ethnic cultural, like Mike talked about with respect in low income, high crime areas. Courtesy costs you nothing, and you need to know how to show respect in a way that the other party is going to receive it. There's a way we shake hands. There's a pace to a conversation. There's a way we broach difficult topics. There's a way we tell hard truths. There's a right amount of eye contact and a right amount of like humor that you have to be able to like bring to bear even when you're being deliberate in an interaction, even in a high consequence interaction. To quote the great Craig Douglas, who runs the ECQC course with ShivWorks, he points out there's a big difference between saying stay the fuck back and stay back, motherfucker. And if you don't understand that difference, you shouldn't be using words like that. Right? Social skill. That is you making adjustments in how you're interacting in order to advance what you're trying to do. Usually knowing how to show respect and how to show courtesy in a given subculture.
Yeah, one of the leadership sort of mantras that comes to mind is you address the action and not the person, right? And that I think goes a long way, especially if you're pointing out something that people don't want pointed out. You don't make it personal. You don't make it about them and just maybe something that they did. You address the action, not the person. And the other part of it is when it comes to these potentially like bringing us back full circle to like the hostile, quote unquote, tactical, like potentially dangerous scenarios. One of the things that we talk about all the time is like there's a time to go fast and a time to go slow, and knowing the difference is the hard part, right? And I think to tie in the empathy piece, one of the things that you need to wrap your head around is understanding that, like, by and large, people are inherently good, right? Like in a lot of ways, even though they might have other things going on in their life or their upbringing that led them to do bad things. And sometimes there's a difference between being a bad person and like sometimes just people do bad things. And you have to like distinguish those a little bit and be able to show some unconditional positive regard for humanity. And it doesn't mean that like people don't get held accountable for the bad actions that they have taken, right? But like showing that level of respect and that social skill, say what you mean and mean what you say, like those things in human interactions go a long way to make you generally more effective, right? And frankly, like it makes you a more challenging victim, right? If a guy's like trying to mug you in an alley somewhere and you're like, hey man, I need you to stay back a little bit away from me. I could tell you're going through some hard times right now. Like I carry a $20 bill on me for just such a scenario. Like you got the My Bad 20, right? Which is I don't remember who we steal that from. Is that a Craig thing?
Several people teach that. I'll credit Craig today.
Yeah, sure. But like you keep a $20 bill in your wallet just in case like you need it for such a thing. And it's just it's a throwdown 20. Like, hey man, I could tell you're having a hard time and you're having some, I got a $20 bill, be happy to give you, but I'm going to need you to keep your distance and turn around and walk the other direction. Like it just makes you a harder victim, right? And I don't know, haven't been mugged in a back alley, but like I'd be surprised if a lot of people weren't like, all right, yeah, fuck it, I'll take the $20 and run, But the idea is reading those situations and knowing like there's a bigger picture at play, right? It's not about you, it's not about them, it's about the interaction. Having that healthy sense of detachment helps you problem solve.
So somewhere in here, I need you to have a clear sense of what your interests are, what your agenda is, and you need to have a clear perception of what the other person's interest and agenda is. What do I want out of this relationship? What does that person want out of this relationship? You need a sense of your own limits and boundaries. No one can lead you without your consent, right? And you need to know when to go ahead and be direct or even rude to guard those boundaries, right? Bad guys will tend to take advantage of your social norms that you don't want to be rude or make a scene or whatever, right? Including knowing when to disengage and when to walk away. And understand this covers the whole spectrum, like I said, from funny work interactions to really hostile, really dangerous situations. Is there are two parties and two parties are trying to influence each other. Where this comes up for me often is work, and it's often with coworkers. I deal with a lot of pilots. Pilots aren't really super high on empathy. They're not super high on social skills. And so I can usually see it coming from like 5 miles away. Somebody will walk up to me who I don't ever talk to, or I only ever talk to them when they want something. Yeah. They're like, Jim, hey bro, how's it going? And they like put a hand on my shoulder and, oh, how's your family? Oh, you got kids, right? Like, how are they doing? And I'm like, could you just get to the point. Like, what is it that you actually want here, right? And no, man, I'm just hanging out. Just want to check in on you. And I'm like, why are you burning my time? My time is the thing I value more than almost anything. Like, all I want is just state your business, right? And they're like, oh, hey, can you take a deployment for me? I've got a wedding to go to. Can you just take your entire spring and go overseas? And I'm like, nah, bro. That's like, my kids' birthdays and stuff. Like, I'm not going to do that. Or if you explain to me what you're really trying to do up front and we don't have to do that dance, like I'll usually be a lot more cooperative with you. So I think there's some lessons in leadership to learn from that. Like, if you're going to ask somebody for something, know some things about them first. Like, know whether they value their time, know whether they value a direct interaction. Sometimes it's a cultural thing. And regardless of how they try to, which levers they try to push, because I'm very internally motivated, I know where my limits are. I know what deployments I'm willing to take and which ones I'm not, and that kind of thing. What shifts I'm willing to take. That's kind of our version of shifts is when we go overseas. So I asked the Brain Trust a couple things, our bros in the network. I said, how do you handle this situation when someone is clearly trying to influence you? And one bro said, you know what? When someone starts really trying to press my levers, I ask a lot of questions. Oh, that's an interesting concept. Can you tell me when you've had success with that? Oh, that's a really interesting response. Did anyone have issues with the way you handled that? Oh, that's a different way to approach the issue. Did it change the behaviors to what you're looking for? Oh, it sounds like you have a problem with Susie or Mary or Bobby. What did they say when you told them you had this problem, right? And so, if someone is trying to manipulate you or influence you, sending the questions back at them will help you kind of suss out what they're up to. Next one you got to watch for is obviously misleading or deceptive statements. A bro mentioned sign language, SIGN, shame, insults, guilt, or a need to be right? If someone says you promised or is trying to make you feel guilty, that's a big clue that someone's doing the manipulative garbage with you. One of the ones that I see a lot is, I did you a favor, so now you owe me one.
Yeah.
Like, nothing in this world is free. And I hate looking at the world like that. Like, what's this guy's agenda? How's this guy out to screw me, right? Like, I don't see the world that way. But I also don't want to be blind to it when someone is super blatant about it, right? And that's what I want you to do. I want you to be able to read rooms and read situations, read yourself, recognize when you are thinking a certain way or someone is getting you to think a certain way, when someone is charming you. That's the upshot of this discussion tonight.
Yeah, I think that social reciprocity, or the social contract, right? It's like an unwritten social contract. Like, you did someone a favor, you covered something, bought something, paid for something, and so therefore you're going to do something for them. That really requires self-awareness and good boundary setting on your part, right? Because that'll get you. I've seen that too, the forced reciprocity thing.
Yeah, or anytime you get a sense that you have given someone dirt on you, like they get you to break some rules, and so now they got you. They, like, people who work like that, you got to watch out for it, right? And it's not everybody, but everybody is in some way or another trying to influence everybody else. Like, that's human interaction. We're social critters. We're community critters. That's how we roll. And so I want you to come out on top in those leadership situations, know where your boundaries are, and know where you won't let them take you.
The last thing that I have on this in terms of takeaways for this sort of thing, I think the most valuable thing that you can do is have a clear metric for winning. Like, what does winning look like? And make sure that you, like, if you're setting a good goal, and you might have to refine that, right? It might change during the course of the interaction, but every time you find yourself getting worked up, or you feel insulted, or you feel like it's not going how you want, you need to just take a second to be like, hey, what is the metric for winning here? And understand that there might be incremental wins that lead to the big one, right? Maybe the guy's not in handcuffs yet, but you can get him to sit down. Maybe the guy's sitting down and you could get them to sit in the back of the car, right? Like you can maybe get incremental steps towards it, but you need a sense of detachment to have a clear metric for winning. And I think that's probably the biggest leadership lesson in all of this for a lot of the kinds of scenarios that we talked about. That's all I got, Jim. Anything else?
No.
All right.
That's all I have. Be smart out there. Be safe out there. We're cheering you on.
All right, guys, that's all we got for tonight. This episode is brought to you by Drip Drop. Drip Drop Oral Rehydration Solution is an electrolyte powder that you mix with water. It was formulated by a doctor for quick absorption. I work in the desert, and it only takes a few hours in the heat, wearing body armor, carrying around a bunch of gear before I start feeling like crap and fall behind the curve in dehydration. Drip Drop keeps you in the fight so you can finish the mission and rehab for the next one. Go get you some at dripdrop.com or on Amazon, or ask your supply guy to find it for you. This episode is also brought to you by 09 Holsters. We talk a lot about people, ideas, and hardware on this show, so when we invest in equipment, we always think in terms of experience first. 09 is helping you figure out how to carry the gear you need to be effective. They are built by cops, for cops, with a minimalist design and bomb-proof durability. Radio cases, flashlights, body cameras, even canine remotes, you name it, 09 has been filling a void in tactical duty holsters for more than a decade. Go see what they offer at 09 Holsters, that's ZERO, the number 9, holsters.com. 09, built to win the fight. Don't forget that we put out new episodes on the 1st and the 15th of every month. If you like what we're doing, you can head over to Patreon, give us $1 for each new episode. That money's going to go back into bringing you good content. If you want to interact with us, you could find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We are at TacTangents. You can also email info@tacticaltangents.com. And one last thing, our Facebook discussion group. We've got a little group going on Facebook. If you go to the groups tab on our page, you can join it. We've got more followers on our page than we have in the group. So I know there's some of you out there following the Facebook page that are on Facebook that are not in the group. Lots of like-minded people in there. So come hang out with us. All right. That's all we got. Good talk.